Welcome to Writer's Digest Presents. Hosted by the editors of Writer's Digest, this monthly podcast features conversations with writing and publishing experts whose insights will help ignite your creative vision, hone your skills, build your platform, and get your work out into the world.
Hello, everyone. I'm content editor Michael Woodson, and welcome to Season 4 of the Writer's Digest Presents podcast. Now, I've mentioned something like this before on the pod, but I came to fiction via screenwriting. My first writerly ambition was to become a screenwriter. I grew up obsessed with movies, and what I came to understand was what I loved most about my favorite movies was how they were written, the different ways a script could tell a story. So today, we're talking all about screenwriting, and joining me in this conversation is Script Magazine's editor-in-chief, Sadie Dean. Sadie, thanks for joining me for this chat today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so thrilled to chat all things screenwriting with you.
Yeah. Now, you were on an episode with us last season, but before we begin, and if we have any new listeners, why don't you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the editor-in-chief of Script Magazine. I have a background in filmmaking as well, mostly on the independent side. Done a lot of short films. I've worked on features, commercials, you name it. I've been on it in some facet, mostly as a script supervisor as well, which is also a really fascinating job, I think, for anyone, especially writers. And I'm still doing it, still trying to make movies, and I write and run scripts and get to chat with a lot of amazing filmmakers and storytellers out there on a daily, which is, always a pinch me moment every time I get to do it.
Yeah. I did not know. Did I know you were a script supervisor?
I don't know. Maybe not.
That is a wild job.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds really interesting.
It is. And it's very intense, but it is what's so great about it is that your hands are in every department. Yes. Not creatively, but you just know everything that's happening. So you have to be really focused and tuned in, but you learn so much in terms just of what the actors are doing, what works on the page, what revisions are going to happen, what the director is doing, seeing how it works with the DP and keeping your eye on just, are they crossing the line? And then coming down to the editing, which is you're really taking notes for the editor to make sure that everything, tracks and can cut together, and you make a lot of notes, take a lot of pictures, but it's a great job if you can get it. And you just learn so much.
Yeah. And relentless, long hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, very long hours. They don't tell you that. You still have your work day, right? You show up, your call time, and then, maybe you have a 10, 12-hour day, and then you go home and you keep working because there's all the paperwork you have to get out as well.
It's like being a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're like an educator. I'm always hearing actors talk about how they'll read a certain script and they'll say it was incredible. And I think fiction writers and readers have a different idea about what makes an incredible book versus what we may know or don't know what makes an incredible script. So I'm asking, what makes a good script? Is it the dialogue? Is it the direction? Is it the notes to what the character's going through?
Yeah, I think what makes a good script, especially on a general read, especially if it's an actor or director or producer or financier, whoever it is that's reading your script, I really think it comes down to the voice on the page. Is it distinct? Does it pop? Is it different? And there's a lot of scripts I've read in the industry when I was starting out, especially as an intern at studios and stuff, where the scripts are not formatted to the industry standard, but the story and the characters were really riveting, and there was a very distinct voice on that page from this writer. So I think that's one of the first things. It's does this read well? Is this different, distinct? But also, characters and story. For a lot of people, do they feel emotionally connected to the story or these characters or both? And I think for, going back to actors, I think it's for them, is it a emotional connection? Is there, is the character going through some maybe similar grieving process that they're going through? Or maybe it's something that a character that they just want to sink their teeth into, that's a challenge, and it just, ups the ante for their craft. But yeah, I think that's kind of what it stands out for a good script. obviously you don't want to have a lot of grammatical errors and typos
Sure.
in there, because that kind of slows down the read. But even that, I mean, I've seen professional scripts where like it's riddled with errors, but you kind of overlook it because
Yes.
it reads so well.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, I think depending on who the reader is, because
Sure.
everyone, if it's a studio or producer, they're looking for something very specific.
Mm-hmm.
So, there might be a really good script that comes across their desk, and they're like, "This is amazing," but unfortunately, it's not for us.
Right.
And
Yeah.
hopefully, they'll recommend it to a friend of theirs that's
Yeah.
also in the industry.
It's interesting you say distinct voice is what makes for a good script, because that's true. We talk about that all the time with publishing, like finding your writerly voice is like this thing that you can't, is intangible, but will happen to you eventually, and you start to have a voice even without knowing that you do. But that I'm thinking about in terms of like, if I've watched a show or seen a movie that I just loved, and then they publish the script, I'll read the script in the voice of the movie that I saw. And I think it's really, I think it's a skill to be able to read a script and hear the voice, because one of the biggest differences in like fiction novel writing and script writing is that obviously there's so much on the page in a novel that's helping you. It's helping you with the voice, whereas like in a script, there's way less on one page of a script than there is in a novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think of, there's two really great writers out there that I think of they couldn't be more different, but they are so very similar in that they are so distinct that you could tell right away that it is them. And those people are Aaron Sorkin and Tarantino. And
Yes.
Sorkin's writing is so sparse and quick, and you read his scripts and you just fly through it, and you get what he's going for, you get the tone of it, you get the characters, the plot, all of it. And then with Tarantino, they're like novels basically. It's just all dialogue. Granted, he approaches his writing differently. He writes it all on a typewriter still, and has someone else transpose it for him. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He's still very old school like that, but still with Tarantino, like, you'll see big chunks of dialogue, and that's a big no-no for beginning screenwriters. Like, don't do that. But for some, like, he can get away with it because he's at his point of view. He knows what he's doing. He knows where he's going and what he wants out of these characters, out of that scene, that it just works. And again, it'll be a 140-page script, and you're still like, well, I finished this in no time, because you're just flying through it, because their characters and the dialogue are just so
jumping
interesting.
off the page. Yeah. It's interesting hearing what no-nos are for scripts, like, in that like big, because this is so stupid, and I love this movie. I don't know if anyone's watched it since it came out but me and my husband, but there's a famously long dialogue scene in a movie called Down with Love with Renee Zellweger, and it's like very funny, and it comes out of the scene is so long, and it's just on her face, and it's all dialogue, and I love monologues. I love them, and hearing that that's kind of a no for scriptwriters, that's really interesting to me.
I mean, it's a no, and then there's a way to get away with it.
Absolutely.
Like, they always say, like, oh, flashbacks, don't do it, you're dead in the water if you do it. But if there's a purpose for it, then absolutely. Like, if it moves the story forward, it moves character development, then absolutely have the monologue in there.
Totally.
I mean, some of the greatest movies out there are heavily monologue driven, right?
Yeah. Did you see Midnight Mass? Did you watch that show?
I watched that.
That's a very wordy show. And I was not prepared for that. I thought it would be a little bit more, and I loved it. There's a long scene between two characters. They're talking about like grief and like what happens when we die, and it's like unheard of in a show within the genre of like horror adjacent. And it was just really lovely and touching, and when it's done right, I hear what you're saying, because I feel the way about fiction too. It's like, here are all these rules, but like also serve whatever the story needs, do it. Like, whatever's best for the story, do it. And that reminds me of something that I remember happening, like, or whenever Oppenheimer came out, a big deal with that movie was everyone was talking about how unique the script was to read, because it was written in first person. And I can imagine that. Well, I have a question, and I can imagine that being really like feeling really lively if you're not used to that. And it made me curious about, are there rules that like really are not broken within script writing? And then when they are broken, like how often is that particularly successful?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with writing, and I think this could go with any facet of writing, it's like you learn all the rules so that you could break them.
Totally.
So you should know the rules and know why you're breaking them.
Mm-hmm.
So writing a script that's all in first person, there is a reason for that. There's
Yes.
a purpose for that. And, luckily he's translating that himself, so he knows what he's doing. So people break rules all the time. What was that movie that came out a couple years ago? I mean, it was last year. I've lost track of time. The Bradley Cooper movie where he's
Maestro?
Yeah, Maestro. Yeah. That script breaks every single rule.
Wow.
In the playbook, but it is, to me personally, I thought it was a really fascinating read because you're aware that they're breaking the rules, but it just works so well what they're trying to convey.
Ooh,
and then you see the movie and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And again, I mean, it's a director and writer relationship there. So it makes sense that he was kind of writing for directing, but again, it works so well, I thought.
I loved that movie. I know that was like, either you loved it or thought nothing of it, but I loved it.
Oh yeah. I really enjoyed that one too.
Yeah. Okay, good.
I think we're the only two.
Yeah. And my husband, Josh, was like, this is great. What is everyone's problem?
Yeah.
There are a couple of those this year that I will talk to you about after we stop recording, because I don't want anyone to not like me.
Yeah. That's impossible.
Yeah. We've kind of covered this, but sort of like, so generally speaking, what would you say are the biggest differences between script writing and novel writing?
Yeah, biggest difference. I mean, with screenplays, you don't have a lot of economy. Your, usual golden rule of thumb is you have about 120 pages. One page equals 1 minute of screen time. Do what you can in those few pages and try to keep it light. They always say more weight on the page, the better. And then with that, novels, I mean, you can have a 300-page plus book and you get to really just dig in deep, explore the worlds, expand your world building, have really lavish descriptors, be more in the character's head, where screenplays, you can't do that. It has to all be visual. How can they convey this on screen? A character shouldn't be talking to themselves in the descriptors. It should be, very, active, and they're progressing the story in some way. But I would say those are kind of the biggest differences, like page count and what you're able to do within, those constraints within those page counts.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned the 1 minute per page thing, because I've always heard that, and it's always like eluded me how that could be possible, and whose job it is to keep track of that. Like, is that the job of the writer to be like, everything I'm writing right now is 1 minute, or is that the director's job to maintain that minute from that page, or is that in the edit? Like, how does the math of that work?
Yeah, so in terms of page count, yes, the writer should be aware of how many pages their script is. Obviously, you don't want to write a 200-page script if it doesn't call for it.
Sure.
Or if you're not like Ridley Scott or someone, like, don't do it, you're not going to get produced that easily. But it also depends on genre too. Like comedy is usually a shorter page count. But when it comes to like, equating it to 1 minute of screen time, don't worry about that, because it's all going to change anyways. Once it gets to a director, your scenes will change. And then once it gets to post, your editor is going to trim that down as well. Or maybe they'll like expand one scene, and now it's like a 2 minute scene. And you're like, well, that wasn't original in the script, but like it calls for it. So it just depends on who's going to next in that case. But yeah, for a writer, I wouldn't care about that. Or, they always say like, oh, like worry about budget. Just write the thing.
Totally.
Get it out. And then the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're right. Because I do think about scenes and stuff where in the scene itself, there's maybe a moment of tension, but the moment's quite long. But in the script, it'll just say like there's tension,
Right.
And so like
Right.
that wasn't the writer's job. Like that was the editor and the director to decide how long to hold that tension. So I like hearing you say, writers, don't worry about that. Like write the script. It's going to endlessly change, because that's also true about publishing. Like there's it's also ever evolving how long your book should be, especially if you're a debut novel.
Mm-hmm.
And then for me, at least, I get sort of paralyzed by all of these rules of like, okay, like it can only be this long. So then I'm like doing a word count as I'm writing, and then I don't finish the thing because I'm just like, well, I can't do this. But if you don't write it, it's definitely never going to be long enough,
right,
or short enough.
Right.
So yeah, that's another big difference I'd say between script writing and novel writing, is that the script is sort of the first step into what is going to be a very collaborative thing, whereas in the novel writing is also very collaborative, but like the end goal of the movie isn't the writer's job necessarily either.
Right. Yeah. Unless if you're like a producer or something, if you're lucky enough. But yeah, I mean, with writing, especially if it's your first draft, just write the thing. And if it's 180 pages, that's where the fun starts, right? You're rewriting. So you just start trimming the fat and really like hone in on what's important. And I'm sure that's the same with novel writing too, which is you're like, okay, I got it all out. Does it make sense? Probably not. And that's when you just start like killing your darlings, killing off characters that you don't want to kill off. And that's kind of fun. And it's also a torture at the same time.
Yeah.
So you don't want to hurt anyone. That's, all your fictional characters.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, whatever. You got to do it. You mentioned budget and like not worrying about budget. And you also said you've worked sort of in like the indie film world, the short film world, and you've written and directed short films, correct?
Yeah.
Can you walk us through your writing process, or even just the process for you from beginning to end of a short film?
Yeah. I actually just finished a short last year that did a little minimal festival circuit, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, my writing routine, or how I go about it, is if it's either for myself to direct or for someone else to direct, it's kind of the same thing. Obviously, if I'm working with the director, they have more influence or input of what's going to happen. But I'll start out with like an outline, and the same thing, kind of like a vomit draft, which is like get it all out there, and then I'll kind of refine it and turn it into a beat sheet, and that will usually have scenes in there and kind of like what the characters are, their purpose, what their goal is, if there's any turns or reversals in that's important for that. And then I take all that and I plot that into final draft and kind of have it already laid out as like in script format, because I already have the scenes in there. And then just start typing away, building out the scenes, building out the dialogue, and definitely overwrite. And then I go and start rewriting and do that for as long as I'll let myself, which is usually too long, which is hard to stop. And then once I do that, I send it out to, my trusted circle of writer friends for constructive feedback, and, take in what is important, or I think is important, or if there is a note that they each individually hit at the same time. If I hear it like more than 3 times, it's like, well, that's okay, like a red flag. I should really fix this, even though like this is my favorite thing, but it's not working. So that's usually how I go about it. And if I'm working with a director, it depends. Usually it's for directors on short films, it's more of a visual piece for them. Whereas for writers, are like, I want it to sound good and, track and all that. So it just depends. Some of them are like, we need this to be longer, like even make it 7 pages or 12 pages, like it just needs more. So, you gotta choose your battles when it comes to that. But yeah, that's typically my process. And then for myself, I just, it's kind of, it's fun and difficult, especially if you're directing, because you're like, this is what I see but you also don't want to direct on the page because you, at least for me, you know, with my actors, I want them to bring their own thing to it as well. So I don't want to tell them too much within the
Sure.
descriptors and action. So I kind of like let them discover who these people are as well on the page. But yeah, that's kind of my general attack plan.
I'm curious about your relationship with getting feedback and knowing the difference between, we talk about this, there's we work with an editor, Tiffany Yates Martin, who we adore. And I spoke with her a little bit about, with fiction writing, knowing the difference between getting feedback that you know is really good and it's going to make what you did better, and feedback that you're just like, I see what you're saying, but like, I'm not going to change it. And knowing the difference between that being like a proud moment where you should change it, or
Right.
then like, no, I know that this is serving the story. So I'm just curious, what is your relationship with feedback, and how do you, how do you work through getting feedback?
Yeah, it's definitely an art form. I think, you know,
Yes.
it's like the art form of giving it, and also how do you take it in. For my stuff, and especially when, you know, if I'm giving feedback to someone else, I want it to be constructive. So
Totally.
if someone's giving me feedback, I'm looking for what the constructive bits are, or if, you know, if they're giving me stuff that's just like, oh, it was good, and this character, I just didn't get this joke or whatever. It's like, well, why? And so like, you have to feel comfortable asking that person, like, why this note? I'm now bumping on your note. Can you just like clarify this thing for me? And sometimes, you know, some notes are really great and some notes just aren't. And it's all subjective, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, the biggest thing is, especially if you're going out for feedback, it's good to let the reader know what it is you're looking for in return. So it could be like, hey, like, once you get to this scene, are you bumping on this transition? Or did it make you feel something? What did it make you feel? Which I think is a big thing for any reader. Like, you want them to feel something. Or just like, you know, does this track, is this funny? Did it make you cry? Like, just any of those kind of things, or just like, and it, you know, it could be any genre too, or just like a sci-fi thing. Like, was that believable for this world that they would do this? Because in that way, your reader can really pinpoint and be more constructive, rather than like give you just like
broad
strokes of notes, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I like to go about it. So that way I know what I want in return, and then I can go through and like take what I need from it. And then sometimes people will like call out things that like I wasn't even thinking about, and I was like,
Totally.
Oh wow, okay, that actually changes a lot of things, and thank you, and that actually helped this character or whatever it is. So sometimes you'll find like this little like tiny miracles of like notes, and then sometimes, you know, it's broad strokes.
Yeah.
But be kind when you get the notes. Like, don't be a jerk. Leave your ego at the door, and you know, you want the person for feedback. And most times, I'm sure you're getting it for free, if unless you're paying for it. But even then, it's like you're asking someone for their opinion, and, you know, be kind.
Yeah, both parties.
Yeah,
because I think like this comes with age and experiences, like you know, fledgling little writers that we once were. We're still quite young, but
yeah.
when we thought we were doing the next great American whatever,
right.
It's easy to conflate like critique with cruelty by accident.
Yeah,
we talk about this all the time, and there's just things that like you can never unsay something you said. So just remember that. And you can absolutely get your point across in a gentler way. I promise. And I love the idea of what you're saying of just like, ask for what you want. Like, if there's certain feedback you need, make that clear. Like, instead of just like, our managing editor, Mariah, kind of made this clear to me, is like the idea of, here's what I'm presenting you for feedback, but this is the thing about it that I'm asking. Like, so I'm not interested in your thoughts on this character. I'm happy with it.
Right.
What about this? And I do think there's a little bit of like, but be open to like any possible constructive feedback you could get. Because I think if it's someone you trust, like you said, like they do have you and your story or your script's best interest in mind at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you've like curated your little safety net of
Yes.
people to read your stuff. Like I have a writers group, and I have other friends who are in the industry that I'm like, everything you say is gold. So like, please help me.
Yes.
And there's definitely times where like, I don't know if I agree with that note.
Completely.
But tell me
okay.
why. And they're like, absolutely. Like, let's talk. And you're like, this is great. But yeah, I think it's good just to know what you want and what you want to get out of it.
Yeah. You mentioned also like not necessarily wanting to tell too much to the actors so they can bring their own perspective on to what you wrote. And I'm just wondering, how much has an actor's performance ever like changed your relationship with what you wrote?
Significantly, actually. With my last project, I think because it was also during the time of COVID, and we didn't really get to have that in-person rehearsal time. And the script was definitely a very dark comedy. And
yes. Oh, is this one that I watched?
Yeah.
I loved that.
My film were good.
Yeah.
And these two actors that are both brilliant, and I just told him, I was like, this is who they are on the page, but if there's some kind of nuance or something that you're finding within that character and that relationship, let's chat about it and see where it goes. And they absolutely did things that just blew me away that I wouldn't have thought about, because I was just so close to that material. And then as a director, you're like, I already see it and this is what's going to happen. And they're like, but surprise, I'm doing this. And you're like, oh my God, like now I'm crying because I didn't see that turn happening.
Yeah.
Before,
I hate that was better.
Yeah. Like, how dare you? Yeah. But also thank you. Yeah.
I will take credit at the end of the day, but
right. No. And I think that's the beauty of working, like collaboration with creatives like that, is that, you don't want at least for me, you don't want your actors to just read the dialogue and be like a robot. You want them to connect and portray it in a way that feels authentic to them in this role, in this character, and what they can bring to it. And then, have that relationship with that, their partner, their scene partner, which is always so fascinating to me. Like you never meet them. And then the day of, and you're like,
I have this history with you.
Yeah. Like we've been married for 30 years.
I know.
And like, how did what?
Every single time Josh and I are watching something that we like, I'm like, I specifically could never be an actor. Like it is, I just can't fake a relationship like that. Like we just saw Baby Girl with Nicole Kidman, and I was just like, I could never do this. I could never be an actor. I could not trust my body or like having the guts to do it. No way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I will say though, like for writers, or especially like any kind of filmmaker, director, but really writers, and maybe this is mostly for screenwriters, but maybe novelists, authors, take acting classes, because it will not only like open you up and get you out of your shell, but it helps you really like zone in on what works on the page for characters, especially dialogue. And once you start reading it out and having that playfulness with other actors and another director, it just really opens up your world of what you can do and get away with on the page, and what will actually make it to the edit, rather than like, the cutting floor, now the digital trash bin. But it's so useful.
That's a really good point.
Acting classes, improv,
improv.
Just try it. It's so much fun.
Yeah, well,
it's scary, but it's fun.
Yes, yeah. That's a really great point, because we advice writers hear all the time is, if nothing else, either read your work aloud or have someone read it aloud to you, because you really need to hear the cadence of it. And I have a writing group as well, and my one friend was writing. She was trying to adapt a book into a script that. And we were, this was during COVID, and we were over Skype, and she was just having a hard time working something out. And I was like, let's just read it. Like, there's 3 of us. We'll just take a character and let's just read it. And it was so fun. And And she was like, this was unbelievably helpful. Like, I have not once heard this aloud. Like, I'm just writing this for me, and now I can hear it aloud, and it just unlocked something for her. So yeah, like having it performed somehow.
Yeah, table reads are so great too.
Yes.
If you can do it, and it doesn't even have to be actors. It's just your friends.
Yes.
Like, pour some drinks or not, whatever your poison is, and just have fun. Because it is so useful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also another great form of feedback too, because in that moment too, you know, people might be like,
Energy.
hey, that was kind of weird, or like, hey, that was actually really funny, because you're also getting like real time reactions from them too, right?
Can you imagine, like, the table read for the last episode of Game of Thrones? You can just feel in the room, they're like, got it.
Yeah.
But then there's like Severance, which we're obsessed with, that there's a huge twist at the end, and we just rewatched it, and we were like, can you imagine being in that table read and you learn that for the first time in front of your coworkers? Like,
right.
Anyway.
Yeah. It's so cool.
Yes.
Having that surprise.
Yes. And that sort of leads to, like, performance is a big part of what makes a script, you respond to a script, but also, like, one of my favorite movie of all time is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And that was when I was like, I love scripts. Like, I love the way this story unfolded. I love the dialogue. And that's a great example of, like, what you said. It's a lot of memory, and that should have killed the movie, but, like, it needed it. But it sort of flips the switch on memory. It's like backwards memory, kind of like Memento. But anyway, and it was the movie that I was like, I want to be a screenwriter. And I'm just wondering, like, before you got into this industry, what was, like, the best script you'd ever read or even seen? When you watch a movie, you're like, that was an incredible script.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The first thing that comes to mind, and I guess this is kind of cheating, is I was in film school, and it was one of the first scripts that we had to read and do a script analysis on, and it was Chinatown by Robert Towne. And I had seen them.
How's this cheating?
Because it's film school. Yeah, I don't know.
Whatever, yeah.
But I remember, like, seeing the film before, and I'm like, yeah, it's a great film. And then you read the script, and you're like, oh my God, like, this is masterful. Like, you just get all of it here. And granted, I probably read a draft that, you know, Polanski probably had his hand in as well. But Robert Towne's voice is very distinct on that page, and you just get it, and you get what's happening, and it's so easy to track. So that's definitely one of the, like, most memorable scripts. Sure. And then, you know, growing up, there's, you know, all the Tarantino films, like Pulp Fiction. I was like, this is the best movie ever. Like, why can't I do this? Like, this is great. And I, like, eventually found a copy of his script, Reservoir Dogs.
Did you?
Yeah. And again, like, that was such a great read, but also it was just so dense with dialogue. Yeah. But it works. It flows. And I think, you know, having seen the movies and you read the script like you've done before, you're just like, yeah, like, it makes sense why this was made. Completely. And why this is such a, you know, a favorite amongst, you know, so many cinephiles.
Yeah, totally. God, you know, this is silly, but I had never thought about Tarantino's scripts as being particularly wordy, but they're so memorably wordy. Like, when you're saying, I was like, of course, like the most iconic things about his movies. I mean, of course, he's like a great visionary, but the most iconic things about his movies, in my opinion, are the way the dialogue is spoken, even like in playing with the characters. I'm just thinking specifically Kill Bill Volume 1, when Uma Thurman and Lucy Liu are just like, there's so much tension in what they're saying to each other, and they're bouncing off of each other in a really fun way. And you think of his movies as, like, really violent and oddly funny, and what's kind of hiding under all of that is, like, well, all of that's in the script. Like,
right, exactly.
Yeah. That another sort of question related to that is, like, what's a script you think writers could study to help them understand screenwriting?
So I think there's no right or wrong answer. Like read what you want. There's a lot of, and I'll give you these sites as well, databases that you can download scripts for free from movies that you love, but also like read scripts that are, deemed not good, because you'll also learn a lot from those as well. I feel like any movie that gets produced, it's so hard to make a movie.
Yes.
So
it's hard to make a bad movie.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Making movies hard.
Yeah. It's really, really hard. So read everything you can get your hands on, if that's what you want to do, either if it's feature writing or writing for TV or streamers or whatever it is that you want to do. There's resources out there to find that and read all of it. Obviously read the greats. William Goldman, there's a great book out there that has like 5 of his selected screenplays. Unfortunately, Princess Bride is not in there, but it's like All the President's Men and a handful of others. And then read, what's coming out now, like Deadline every year. They put out all the contenders that are, up for Oscars and all the awards for free. And these are the people that are going to be possibly nominated. Read those scripts and they're free.
Yeah.
So
we love free.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned like all of these resources. Is there anything, and you're the editor-in-chief of Script Magazine, is there anything that Script or Script University, where's a good place for our listeners to start if they're interested in connecting with us in that way?
Yeah. So if you're looking to start out and really dig in as a writer, obviously there's online courses, and Script University is a great place to go, which is part of Writer's Digest University. A lot of great classes, ranging from the fundamentals of screenwriting to more advanced work. So it really depends on like what it is that what your goal is, but there's a lot of options there. The Writer Store, we also have on-demand webinars that, all over the place of whatever it is that you're looking to do, what your goals are. And then of course, there's the free resources also online, reading screenplays. And if you're in Los Angeles or if you're visiting Los Angeles, go to the Writers Guild Foundation Library. They have all the great scripts and TV pilots and Bibles in there. You can't take them home, but you can read them there. And the staff there is like, their brains are, they're just like this like factory of just like movie knowledge. It's just like, they're just incredible. And they're so helpful and so resourceful. And I remember during COVID, they were doing these like happy hour writing sessions for writers. And they would be there if you had questions for something I was writing. I think I was writing like a pilot or something. And I was like, I wish I had this like resource to this script, but I can't find it anywhere. So I just asked them like, hey, do you happen to have this or know where I can find it? Like, no, we don't, but we'll go find it and we'll let you know. And they found it for me.
No way.
And like sent to me. And I was like, okay, well, that was above and beyond and incredible. And then in terms of other, screenwriting classes or getting started, obviously there's film school.
Sure.
Definitely more expensive. But I think the benefit of going to film school is that not only are you working with, industry pros that are going to be your teachers, hopefully, you're building your film community. So you're networking. So you're hopefully, walk out of that, 4-year college or 2-year master's program with your team that you could go to, that you're hopefully making movies to, or they're going to recommend you. But also I think it's, with film school, and when you're older, you have more of like your intention of what you want out of it. So like, again, like don't be an a-hole and be collaborative and all that. But, again, it's definitely weighs more in your pocketbook, but online classes, Script University, great place to start.
Yeah, for sure. I have so many more questions for you that I thought about while we were talking and I never asked them. But this was so lovely. Yeah. And if our listeners want to find you and Script, where can they go? You find me on scriptmag.com. I'm online every now and then on the world of X sometimes,
people ever have questions, they could reach out to me on there as well,
Yeah.
and shoot me a DM if they have any questions.
Yeah. And Script is on Instagram, right?
Yes. So on Instagram, it's Script Magazine. And then scriptmag.com.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sadie.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thanks for listening to Writer's Digest Presents. Visit us online at writersdigest.com and make sure to follow us on social media at Writer's Digest for daily updates on articles, online courses, live events, and more. See you next time.